Welcome to the Monday edition of the Southeastern 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell with me today. Blake, we've got a lot to talk about, a little bit in the three sports we cover. And let's start with baseball, where I got to see Mississippi State up close and personal in person for the first time all year. That was a treat. We had a crazy weekend of baseball around the SEC, and one thing happened that has not happened all year. I'll see if you can guess it.
It's an interesting one. A team got to Jack Leiter.
Well, you might debate that happened last weekend with Tennessee, but yeah, that's good. Nobody pulled off a sweep for the first weekend all year.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, that's true.
I'm looking back. I've got a series chart. Week 2 was just a bloodbath, where I think everybody swept or was swept. It's evened up a little bit since then, and this is the first time. Last weekend there was only one sweep, and this time there were none. So things getting interesting in the SEC. Man, there was some entertaining baseball to watch. You had Florida and Auburn had some high-scoring games that went down to the wire. You had Vanderbilt and Mississippi State played a pretty entertaining series. You had that crazy LSU Ole Miss series. Let's start with that one. I don't know how much you got a chance to see. LSU goes to Oxford and takes the first 2 games. And by the way, Ole Miss, which I think was number 1 a month ago, has now lost 4 straight weekend series. That said, the Rebels didn't get swept, and they almost got swept this weekend. I'm watching that game on TV. Ole Miss is down 9-1 in the 8th. I walk out of the room for just a minute, and literally it is 9-5 when I come back. Inning still isn't over. The Rebels, I think it was T.J. McCants hits a grand slam, and we're tied, and then Ole Miss gets a walk-off in the 9th to win it. But, man, 2 programs just having crazy seasons, and I guess we should have expected it, Blake, the way both those teams have played.
That was the theme, right? When we talked about it last week, and when we talked about this series, it was like, man, Ole Miss has lost 3 straight series, and we said, but, when you look at the competition, it's understandable just based on their schedule and all that. But then we said, man, LSU here, and I think we talked about it on Friday. We're like, well, they lose that first one, and it's all of a sudden, you're thinking in the back of your mind, like, here we go again. Could we really lose another series? Like you said, the next day they come out, lose again, and have to just have an unbelievable sequence of events to happen on Saturday to be able to win that game in the fashion that they did. So, yeah, it's crazy. But, I mean, I feel like this sort of summarizes what we said going into the season, too. I know you and Barry talked about this a lot, but it's like this is this league, and one of those things where 1 week or a month ago you could be number 1 in the country, but things can quickly go in the opposite direction just based on the level of talent and the level of competition that you're playing. But hey, on the flip side, good for LSU, because that's a team we talked about a lot that sort of needed a little bit of confidence and momentum here, and I guess they get it. Well, not with the way the series finished, but at least getting 2 wins. That's probably better than most expected. So.
Game 3 was, I think, the most interesting. I think Game 2 might have been the most meaningful because Doug Nikhazy for Ole Miss has another terrific start. The bullpen blows it again, as it has been wont to do lately. But A.J. Labus for LSU goes a complete game, 9 innings, scatters 10 hits and a walk, hits a batter, 6 strikeouts, and a complete game win. And LSU's pitching, they've had bullpen troubles too, as has Ole Miss. We've talked about that a bit. And, of course, the bullpen kind of blew it for LSU in Game 3. But I thought, they won a game with Landon Marceau having his second worst start of the year. So I think if you're LSU, you come out of the weekend feeling better about your starting pitching. They, of course, lost Jaden Hill. That's been about a month now. And Hill was not having a great season anyway, certainly not the one that people hope. So from the point of what he was contributing, not as big a loss maybe as you would expect. From the point of what they hope to get, it's a huge loss. But I think if you're LSU, you come out of the weekend feeling better about your pitching. And oddly enough, Ole Miss can sort of say the same thing because Derek Diamond was really good. He'd been the one guy that they couldn't get good starts out of. They had Nikhazy hurt. Diamond had been the guy that had been getting bombed. He gets kicked out of the rotation. He comes back and pitches really well. Now, for Ole Miss, Gunnar Hoagland didn't pitch this weekend. Got an arm issue. Sounds like he's going to be back soon. But it's crazy. As many runs as were scored in that series, I think both teams, if you want to look at it optimistically, have a little bit of something to feel better about in terms of starting pitching leaving that series.
Yeah, and LSU will need it, right? Next week,
Oh,
this
man,
weekend,
yeah.
because that's your reward for finally getting some I guess, much needed confidence built up. Is to now turn around and play Arkansas. Of course, I think Ole Miss they stay in Oxford and play South Carolina. So yeah, that's I mean, certainly, like you said, some takeaways for both those teams, and they'll need that pitching probably just based on their upcoming schedule there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's good that Ole Miss is staying in Oxford or not.
Right.
I mean, I guess they've lost 4 straight series, 2 home, 2 on the road. So both have been problematic. Yeah, looking forward to this weekend. Well, I mean, I guess it's redundant. Every weekend's a good weekend. There's so many good teams. You're going to have some great matchups. But Ole Miss, South Carolina is a really interesting one. Arkansas at LSU, suddenly that could be a little bit more interesting than we thought. Tennessee, Kentucky. I think that one would be a little bit more interesting if it's in Lexington. Cats had a really good weekend. We don't spend a lot of time talking about them. Florida's going to host Vandy, and we'll talk about these later in the week. But just looking ahead, I see some pretty intriguing matchups here. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not the best now that I look at it, but at every weekend there's good series, and I see a few here. But let's talk about Mississippi State Vandy for a minute. I'm at that one. Kumar Rocker just was pretty dominant on Friday night. Vanderbilt wins that series. State gets to Jack Leiter in game 2. I thought Will Bednar was really good for State. Sat right behind home plate, watched that kid pitch. I don't know if he is a major league starter, but I'm pretty convinced he could pitch out of the back end of a bullpen. He's getting some first-round buzz potentially. Speaking of back into the bullpen, I got to see Landon Sims for the first time. And seeing him up close, especially at a time where he probably did not have his stuff, was interesting. He's got a really sharp slider. I don't know that he used it as much. His fastball was sitting 94, 95, and I swear didn't look it, which I think is why he's so effective. The ball is just easy out of his hand. It's a high spin, 4-seam job that he runs up high, and Vanderbilt just didn't hit it. Now, they did hit him early and made that game interesting. And then you had Sunday's game where State really threatened to run away with it early. State gets 3 runs off Patrick Riley, has the bases loaded with 1 out. Vanderbilt brings in Chris McIlvain, who shuts him down. State leaves the bases loaded again in the 3rd, and then in the 4th, Vanderbilt gets 2, and then 3 in the 5th on a Carter Young home run to go ahead 5-4 and eventually win that one 7-4. But Blake, that is a really underrated rivalry right now. Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. I think those two teams love to beat each other, and we certainly saw a compelling series in Nashville.
Well, I was going to ask you too about Mississippi State because you said you got a chance to see them in person, and kind of you talked about just the potential that's there. I mean, and we've said this so many times, when you compare these top teams. I mean, right now, as we know, Arkansas, whether you got a 1, you got a Vanderbilt at 2, you got Mississippi State at 4, Tennessee 5. I mean, is there, for you, like, is there anything that just completely, Mississippi State that you look at and say, okay, like, I can maybe see them being the one of this group that all of a sudden, we're talking about the most here a month and a half from now, just based on kind of what we've seen. Because like you said, I mean, that's a group that I think, we've talked a lot about sort of Tennessee in terms of just the magical sort of season they've had. Of course, we've spent a lot of time talking about Arkansas, the top team in the country, and then Vanderbilt has been there too, and we talk about the pitching and all that. But I sort of feel like Mississippi State's the team we necessarily, maybe doesn't get some of that. And look, I mean, they're the number 4 team in the country, but I do think, like you said, just maybe getting a chance to see them there in person, there could be some of those things that maybe, I don't know, like they're one of those teams that could kind of, be that team we're talking about the most here a month or so from now.
I think right now there are 4 or 5 tiers to this league. I think Arkansas and Vanderbilt in some order at the top. I think Tennessee, Mississippi State, and maybe South Carolina. I hedged my bets on whether I put South Carolina in that group or the next one. I think I would put them in the second group. So that's 5 teams. I think Ole Miss, Florida, Georgia are the next tier. I think Kentucky, Alabama, LSU, the next one, and then A&M, Auburn, and Missouri at the bottom is how I see it. But that doesn't mean that there can't be some overlap in those tiers. I mean, State, frankly, looked as good, if not better, than Vanderbilt for a lot of the weekend. Now, Vanderbilt blows that game open on Sunday a little bit. But I saw a team that, I mean, everybody knows State's got arms. I was really impressed with their fielding. I thought the left side of their infield was really good. Rowdy Jordan at center is just a rock for them. He's such a tough out right now. Tanner Allen is a tough out. He's one of the better hitters in the league. I feel like for State, Blake, if I'm picking issues here, I think 7, 8, and 9 in their order is an issue. I think there's a big drop-off between the first 5 or 6 guys and the bottom end of the order, which is not unusual. And it doesn't mean that you're on a great team. It just means you're in an elite league where I think you got a couple teams above you in Arkansas and Vandy where that's not the case, and probably one below you in Ole Miss too. The other thing I'm a little concerned about with State, and this gets resolved because they've got a lot of arms on the back end, probably more than anybody. I looked this weekend, they've got 12 or 13 guys who have pitched double-digit innings this year. And I think most, if not all of them, have pitched pretty well. So they've got a way to sort of make up for it. But you see what happened in the league this weekend with Rocker, with Labus. You see it at LSU every weekend with Landon Marceau. You see it with Ole Miss every weekend until this one with Gunnar Hoagland. I think a starting pitcher that can give you 6 or 7 innings at a minimum is about as valuable a commodity as you can have. My concern for State is that it doesn't have that potentially, or maybe we haven't seen it. Now, again, the bullpen that they've got helps make up for that. But I watched Christian McLeod on Friday. Frankly, I thought he got squeezed by the strike zone. He got frustrated. He had one bad inning, and that was enough when Rocker was on the other side for Vandy. So there was that. I thought McLeod, his breaking ball was outstanding, but he just wasn't hitting the corners. He was trying to nibble. He wasn't getting the calls. And so he had a very sudden exit because of that. I thought that Will Bednar was really good, really, really good. Now, he's more of a 2-pitch guy right now, but that fastball was 94, 95. He kept it down in the zone. I presume that was a 2-seamer, but I don't know. But I really was impressed with the way that he operated down in the zone. And Vanderbilt just didn't get off a lot of good swings. They were not able to lift the ball and drive the ball like they like to do. Now, he's a converted reliever. And between the 2 pitches and that, I think he threw in the 90s in terms of pitch count, but I think that's the upper end for him. But I was really impressed with him. And on Sunday, Jackson Fristow was really good the first time around the order, just dominated Vanderbilt. But again, same thing with McLeod. That 4th inning was just a disaster for him. And it got out of hand from there when the bullpen behind him wasn't as good as it normally is. So I would say for State, Vanderbilt's coach Tim Corbin called State an Omaha team exiting the series in his Sunday press conference. I think that's right. But if you want to look at the cracks, I think that's where they are. Now, there's a lot of time between now and the end of the season. I think that State would be an exceptionally tough matchup in a place like Hoover or out in Omaha where the parks are bigger. State's issue is the same as Vanderbilt's. They'll give up some home runs, but I think a lot of the balls that are leaving the yard against both staffs are not going to get out on those bigger parks. And I would bet that I'd say there's more than 50% odds that Mississippi State gets to Omaha based on what I saw this weekend.
And have a very favorable schedule. We talked about last week. Their last 12 game or SEC games now are going to be against A&M. They're going to go to South Carolina, which won't be easy. But then they get Missouri and Alabama, which I think are obviously two winnable series. I think for them right now. So yeah, I mean that's maybe there's a chance to fix some of those issues down the stretch. But I think when you look at it just from all the teams around the SEC, you've got to think that that's a again, not an overly easy schedule, but I still think that's probably more favorable than some of the other schedules you'll see for some of the other kind of top teams in the league the rest of the way.
Okay, Blake, I have rearranged projections based on what's ahead, based on the records to date and what I've got projected from here on out. I've still got Vandy, Tennessee, Arkansas, three-way tie with 20 wins, State with 19, South Carolina 18, Ole Miss and Florida 17 each, Georgia 15, Alabama 14, Kentucky 13, LSU 12, Auburn 10, A&M 9, Missouri 6. Now, this is what's interesting, okay? I think for a while we felt like the league was going to get 8, maybe 9 teams in. Kentucky made it interesting by taking 2 from Alabama. The Cats at 9-9. Now, I've got Kentucky winning 13, which I think with its schedule is not going to be good enough. But if I miss by a win or two, I mean, if Kentucky gets to 15-15, I don't think that's going to matter. It's going to get in the tournament. Alabama kind of right there at 14. I think 14 would be good enough given the strength of Alabama's schedule, given that Connor Prelip has been out, given that the Tide have had some injuries, some other places. Now, LSU is going to be the interesting one because the Tigers have an RPI right now of 24, number one strength of schedule. I've got them projected to win a dozen after this weekend, but suddenly that 11 is not looking, I guess, as impossible as it did a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, we talked about with LSU. Obviously, you can do a lot and make up a lot of ground against Arkansas, and potentially, boost yourself that way before you have those series the rest of the way. It may not do a whole lot for you, like we talked about, with teams like Auburn and A&M and such. But yeah, I mean, it's that's what we said. I mean, you can project as much as you want, but as we've seen, it's just sometimes it's very hard to predict, especially how, I mean, even, I was going to say, even how the series against the top teams, but really, I mean, as we saw with, LSU, Ole Miss and such, there's a lot of sort of different aspects and variety you see each weekend in this league. And, a couple wins here or there, or a couple things not going your way, can really be sort of that point, whether you're in or whether you're not. And I think that'll be even more fascinating rather than just the race at the top, like you talked about with some of the teams and potentially, what the top of the standings could look like at the end of the season, but really those teams that are right there in that middle part and trying to sort of figure out, okay, where do we find those wins the rest of the way? And will it, be enough to kind of boost our overall resume and where they're at heading into, the SEC tournament and then beyond that. So, yeah, that's going to be fascinating to watch here. I think there's just so many different storylines. Like you said, it's not just the teams at the top. That there's a lot of teams, like we talked about with LSU and others, that are kind of right there trying to say, okay, where do we find those wins to put us in a better position?
I think two of the things that surprised me the most this weekend were Alabama getting beat the way it did against Kentucky, and Tennessee scoring 31 runs at A&M. Now, I know that Tennessee's a good team, right? But we thought A&M had pitching. Boy, I think we ended up being way off about that. And just seeing Tennessee put the whipping on the Aggies at Bluebell Park the way it did was a little bit eye-opening.
Yeah, I would say 20 runs on Sunday, 15 of those in the final 3 innings. That's not something you see a whole lot, period, but especially in SEC play on the road. That was, quite an impressive feat for a team that we just continually seem to repeat that each year. I mean, each weekend. There's always something that kind of stands out with this Tennessee team, and like you said, to put up that many runs, just pretty impressive to say the least. And then you mentioned it with Kentucky and Alabama. I know Kentucky, certainly hit quite a few home runs. They had no trouble doing that on Sunday, and I think it was the 11-0 game, where they hit 7 home runs
in a 7-inning game.
Right, in a 7-inning game. That's boy, that's not easy to do either. So that's what we talk about. I mean, it's just like these are the kind of things. Seems like we say every week. On Monday coming out of the weekend. Like these are just some of those things that if we'd have projected that Kentucky Alabama series or Tennessee and A&M, you just can't think about those just kind of scenarios where it's like Tennessee, like we said, scores 15 in 3 innings, puts up 20 in a single game. And then you have Kentucky hitting 7 home runs in a 7 inning game. That's just, man, it's again, the margin for error in this league, couple tiny things, couple weaknesses. Boy, they can really be exploited against just the potential of some of these teams. And like we said, Kentucky's further down the ladder than Tennessee, but that was still a pretty impressive feat there to do what they did against Alabama.
Well, Kentucky's been pretty easy to dismiss, okay, because it didn't play that North Carolina series to open the year. Its out-of-conference schedule was probably the worst of anybody in the league. It opens, okay, it beats Missouri. Well, so what? Missouri was just awful at that point. The Tigers have gotten better. It goes to Auburn and sweeps. That opened my eyes a little bit at the time, but then Auburn just can't beat anybody for about a month. Then Kentucky goes to Mississippi State and gets swept, and we're like, okay, well, here we go. And then follow that up with losses to LSU and Georgia. But you look at the Cats now, and we said before the season, this bunch had offense, right? Collette and Rhodes, and they've got 3 or 4 hitters in that lineup that are potentially dangerous. I know Alabama's not the top of the heap, right? And I know that with Prelip, that makes their pitching a lot more shaky, but this is a team that's had some arms, and Dylan Smith and Chase Lee and William Freeman's been pretty good, I think, for the most part. I felt like Alabama was a really tough team. Again, the record, some of that's a product of the schedule, which I think Alabama's been in the top 5 in strength of schedule all year long. But you look at Kentucky and the way TJ Collette is hitting in the league, I mean, that kid's just been on fire. Colton Kessler, you got a guy that's missed a lot of time, but he's leading the league in batting average and league play at 406. Collette's second in the league in slugging behind Evan Russell at Tennessee, who, oh, by the way, got at least one more in that series. He's just been on a home run hitting binge. Kessler's second in the league in on-base percentage. I mean, I feel like the reasons we could have dismissed Kentucky were fair. When you've got the rest of the league that's played a pretty tough schedule, I think that you have to take 2 ways of evaluating teams. But I think it's time to start considering Kentucky as a real threat to get in the tournament and to beat some teams, some good teams on the weekend. And here's another thing, okay? We said before the year pitching with Kentucky an issue. Well, Zach Lee throws a complete game, gives up 1 hit, darn near perfect. So I would say the way that he pitched to what is a pretty decent Alabama lineup, I don't know. I don't know that it's fair to put Kentucky's series win on par against Alabama with maybe what some other teams did. But in my mind, Kentucky might be the team that I left the weekend with a better impression of than when I started it.
Well, they're going to need that the rest of the way because I don't even think you have to look. I mean, they're to me, there's probably no doubt they played the toughest schedule left of anyone. What are they? They've got Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, and Vandy. Tennessee and Vandy on the road, Florida and South Carolina at home. So I mean, this is it. Like this is where we find out exactly what Kentucky's made of over this last month. Because, like you said, this is sort of that point for them to where. I mean, let's say they come out and win a couple of these series, then you're just kind of looking at this team. I mean, they almost, to this point, like you need to win some of these games against these top teams to put yourself in a position, to be where you want to be. And I think this is it. Like you come out of this Alabama series feeling really good about yourself, but you also know that you're about to go into easily your toughest part of the schedule all season. And like I said, probably the toughest schedule of anyone in the SEC remaining. Potentially there. So I think this is where we find out what Kentucky is because it all starts, on Thursday at Tennessee and it only gets, stays tough from there with Florida, South Carolina, and Vandy.
That series on the road against Florida, not this weekend, but next. I say on the road. It's on the road for Florida. That's going to be very interesting because the Gators have not been very good at on the road. Finally got a win this weekend at Auburn, and it wasn't easy. But that's one that, and I think Kentucky will take that series just by virtue of being at home. That's one where if you can get one at Tennessee, you're right there. Now, like you said, the last 2 weekends, South Carolina at home. Let's see, the Gamecocks have lost a series at Vanderbilt, but they've won their other two at Georgia, at LSU. So that's a pretty good road team. I had Vanderbilt sweeping that final series of the year because Kentucky's just had fits in Nashville lately, and again, Vandy is starting to pick up some momentum. But that's one that if Kentucky just picks up a game there, it changes the title race. Vanderbilt, based on what I've got projected, doesn't win the league at that point. It's going to finish third, and then Kentucky at that point gets 14 wins, and I think probably gets in the tournament at that point. I know the schedule, like I said, hasn't been great, but you consider what UK is about to add, and I think they're suddenly a very interesting team to watch.
Yeah, if you're Kentucky, it's just chipping away. Like no one's going to go in projecting you to sweep any of those series the rest of the way. Quite frankly, some people are going to, like you said, expect you to get swept in some of those, but you've just got to sort of chip away and grab a win here or there. Like that's just sort of where it's at this point for them. And again, they'll have the opportunity to do so. And it is like I think they're one of the more fascinating teams the rest of the way, not because, they're ranked in the top five or anything, but just with that schedule and all season long, we've kind of had that. Okay, are they this good? Are they that good? Like what exactly are they? I think this is exactly where we find out.
Dylan Smith took another loss for Alabama. That kid had pitched so well and was just getting tough luck. Now it's just to the point where he's not pitching that well at all. Sean Hardy gets a win for Kentucky. That's not a name that I really am familiar with. Kentucky's rotation has been there's been some scramble to it, I guess is a good way to put it. They've tried out some different arms, but that was the thing with Kentucky before the season. We said, hey, we think we've got the bats if they can find some arms, and they felt like they had some more coming into the year. That makes them really interesting. Speaking of interesting, Florida-Auburn. I don't know. I know Florida's 11-7, Blake, but it's just not the Florida team.
Yeah.
I think we thought we would see the lockdown pitching just has not been there. Although, I mean, a 4-2 win, a 6-4 win, the second one's in 7 innings, and then that 8-10 pinball game that they played in 7 innings on Sunday. But I don't know, man. With Florida pitching, it just has not come around like we thought it would. And I'm at the point going, based on what we thought preseason, you think it's coming. The Vandy series for them this weekend will be key, but it's a disappointing 11-7 to me for Florida because you got series wins over Auburn, Missouri, and A&M, and that's half your game so far.
I was going to say, it's interesting to think about, isn't it? Florida had won 8 games in a row prior to that Auburn game, yet you still think about it and you're like, did those 8 wins tell you a whole lot necessarily?
No.
Right? And that's the thing, because you had beaten Missouri, you had beaten a bad Jacksonville team, Auburn, Florida State's not Florida State. Like, it's just, yeah, I mean, aside from that one win, after losing the first 2 games at Tennessee, there's just, like there wasn't anything that necessarily stood out from that and made you say, okay, well now we feel like Florida's turning that corner and they're about to sort of turn things up a notch. It hasn't felt that way the entire season. I feel like we've had the same conversation with them. It really, it's interesting. Like we go back to probably the conversations we were having, that third week in February and saying, man, something just does not feel right. Even after that first series, which, there's only so much you can take away. But I even felt like at that point we were still like, man, something's just not right here with this team. And you didn't know how it was going to unfold the rest of the way. But, as we've seen, it just, there's not a whole lot, I guess, confidence-wise that you think that they're going to be able to reach that level, at least at this point, that we thought they would before the season. And, of course, as we'll talk about throughout the week, does not get any easier here moving forward as they play Vanderbilt this weekend.
Well, I think that key series was when they go to South Carolina and they get swept. Yeah. After they'd swept A&M the weekend before, and we're going, okay, this team A is not playing well on the road, hasn't for a couple of years now. And B just has not pitched the way we thought. We talked about Judd Fabian's slump. He's gotten a little better, but They go back home. They beat Ole Miss the next week in 2 or 3, and that's when Ole Miss, I think, is number one in the country. So we're going, aha, right? This is the time where Florida flips the switch. O'Sullivan's gotten their attention. Whatever it is that's bugging them, you figure they have turned over a new leaf, and you thought that Ole Miss series was going to maybe kind of be their turning point. Instead, what it did, it was a turning point for Ole Miss.
Yeah.
Rebels haven't won a series yet. I don't know. I think that what I said a couple weeks ago has been dead on about them. Like, even if Florida does start playing better baseball, the schedule and the RPI are going to be prohibitive, because here sits Florida at 32 on the RPI right now. You all things being equal, you need to be in the top 16 to host. The schedule is not what it's been in the past. You go back and look at other things that try to boost their resume. They lose that series to Miami to start the year. Miami, not quite what we thought it would be at that point. They lose a midweek game to Florida State, although they got one back later. Let's see what they are in terms of quad one wins, because I don't think it's very good. They're 4-8. That's a very un-Florida like number. In the number of quad one games they play, because they usually have more than anybody. And being the number of wins, you get a couple against Vandy, and maybe the conversation budges a little bit, and maybe you get a couple on the road against Kentucky, and that can open some eyes. If you do that, then suddenly you are 15-11, and maybe you got an argument. But I don't buy that Florida's going to win 4 games between those two series, Blake.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I mean, we talked about sort of the fascinating stretch for Kentucky coming up, but I think it's equally fascinating for a team like Florida, like you said, because I mean, realistically, knowing that you're going up against Rocker and Leiter, 1-2 this weekend. I mean, you can lose both those games, and you just never know about the Sunday game. Like, you could get swept by Vanderbilt, and I don't think there'd be a ton of surprise at that, just based on how, Vanderbilt has played. And then, your back's up against the wall going up against a Kentucky team, like we said, that really needs to find some wins at this point. And so it's, and I think it's one of those where, the way that, you lose that game to Auburn, which, I mean, it's one game, but still, I think just the way you lose that game, and now you got to bounce back and get ready, like we said, for the series this weekend. And it's just, I don't know. I'm with you. Like, Florida's just one of those teams that you feel like it's just never gotten right to the point that you thought they would. And, I mean, look, maybe that happens. Maybe they come out and have a great weekend against Vanderbilt, able to turn that into another great weekend against Kentucky, and then, you're off from there. But I just don't, my confidence level on that is not very high right now.
I think the astonishing thing, and this is, of course, mostly out of Florida's control, but usually when you're playing those midweek games and those weekend games against the Florida teams, basically everybody down there is usually pretty good in baseball, right?
Yeah.
Well, this year Miami's maybe a little bit down compared to what we thought. Florida State is down from what we thought. And then you look at some of the other games. Let me pull up their schedule here. Okay, they've got 4 games against Jacksonville. They lose one of those. Jacksonville 266 on the RPI. I don't even know how that's possible in that state.
Yeah.
They win 4 against Florida A&M. Going in, that's not going to move the needle. North Florida's 129 in the RPI. They've got 2 there. Stetson's down from what it has been most years at 117. So I think one thing that has hurt Florida has been the fact that even when you get some of these losses, right, sometimes an RPI loss, you'll see a team go up, especially if it's on the road against a good team. Like Mississippi State did that. I think State was 10 in the RPI on Saturday. And let's see, after losing at Vandy, it moved up to 6. Or maybe it went 7-6. But anyway, State loses 2 or 3. I think went in as the 10 RPI team, left Nashville as a 6 RPI team. So there's a nuttiness factor to RPI in terms of scheduling and who you play, where you can actually get blown out of some games and improve in your RPI if it's on the road against a good team. So that's hurt the Gators, no doubt, because I don't think RPI always tells you the whole story. But I just, everything else I look at, The main thing is Fabian has not been the SEC Player of the Year type that we thought he would be, not even close. And their pitching has just not been what we thought it would be. And I don't know if the Gators can get that right in the next 2 weeks in time to host.
Yeah, completely random tidbit, but you talked about sort of those games between the Florida teams, and it is so weird to think, like, we talk about Florida and them not being to that level that, we necessarily thought they would be. But, I mentioned Jacksonville. You said they're 266 in the RPI. They've got 7 wins this season. 2 of those wins are against Florida and Florida State. It's just like, that's just right. Like, that's just fascinating when you think about it overall. So, yeah, pretty wild.
The Massey ratings page has not updated its rankings. That's where they keep track of all the computer polls that are out there, which there aren't a lot. Florida was 17 heading into the weekend. I guess you go win 2 or 3 of Auburn. It doesn't move the needle on that either way a whole lot. Boyd's World this morning, Florida at 26. I generally like Boyd's World, but he generally skews a lot towards the West Coast. I think this year he doesn't seem to be doing it quite as much. So I haven't put as much stock into his rankings lately because of that. And you look at what he's got this year. He's got a top 5 of Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Fairfield at 3, Oregon 4, Tennessee 5, Notre Dame 6, Texas 7, Stanford 8, TCU 9, Arizona 10. I don't think that's out of line. Mississippi State 11. I think there's a little bit of overweighting to the West Coast, but I've seen worse. But it's Fairfield. The Stags just keep chugging along, Blake, 26-0, and they were really screwing things up at the top. Arkansas finally went back to number 1 in the RPI. Fairfield is 25-0. And now number 2 in the RPI, sandwiched right there between Arkansas and Vandy.
I just want them to keep winning. I want to keep having this conversation about Fairfield because we put it on our Twitter. We just said, I mean, what was it? I think you put the tweet out. I don't know. It was probably a couple weeks ago now. But like the Fairfield problem, we're going to put that in all
our
caps.
National Fairfield problem.
Our national Fairfield problem. Yes, it continues, and we will see if anyone can solve the national Fairfield problem.
D1 Baseball went up and covered that series between Fairfield and Manhattan this weekend, which I thought was great.
Yeah, that's great.
That's one of those that, like, I don't think anybody up there writes about them, and you're just going, okay, what's the story here? Apparently they've got a good coach who's been improving that program. I think they went to their only regional back in maybe 16. Here's the other thing with Fairfield. You've got St. Peter's, which is the worst program in college baseball. They had 6 games scheduled with St. Peter's. 5 of them got canceled, 4 ostensibly for weather or COVID early in the year. They win a game against St. Peter's 20-2 in 7 innings. St. Peter's says, hey, we're out of pitching. We're not going to play you again on Wednesday, the 21st, after they played a first game in that one. They had 2 7-inning doubleheaders there. But
gotta have pitchers. 7-inning
doubleheader. You got to have pitchers. So I don't know if just playing St. Peter's would have knocked them down a couple more spots in the RPI, but they sweep 4 from Manhattan this weekend. They've got Siena coming up, which is 286 in the RPI, then Niagara, which is 101, Iona 221. So that's their last 3 series in the MAAC. Let me see what they are in strength of schedule. This is the other thing about RPI. They're 98 in strength of schedule. I'm not sure they've even played. Okay, Canisius is 40 in the RPI. Ryder is 34. So I guess that makes a little bit more sense. But that's a league where they're not playing out of conference, Blake. And so it's really hard to know what to make of the RPI. But
Fairfield,
that's going to be very interesting if they're sitting there at, whatever it would be, 39-0 on Selection Sunday. They win out and win the tournament. What's the NCAA do with that bunch?
They're the Colgate of the NCAA baseball this year. We talked about Colgate all year in basketball about how they had basically played 4 teams all season and played those same teams like 5 times each, and just one of those deals. It's really hard to figure out in this unique landscape, I guess.
Well, the NCAA loves new venues for hosting. I think if Fairfield is unbeaten or loses 1 or 2 games, I mean, Goodness gracious, you got to consider that a possibility,
Oh
right?
yeah, come on. I mean, I think in that scenario, it's just like, I mean, can you really just not reward a team for that for a performance of that caliber? Again, I know the level of competition is not the same, and everybody would make the argument, well, would they do it in the SEC? Well, of course not. But I still think it's one that, yeah, you've got to certainly look at that and give it a pretty serious consideration. I would say at that point, if that's what we're looking at from their record standpoint heading into that spot. So.
Do we have anything else on baseball? Of course, we'll talk more with Barry tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I think that was it. Like you said, there was a lot of interesting sort of takeaways, but I think it only gets more interesting from here, just based on knowing that we're again a month away and tournament action and all that. So yeah, plenty of storylines to follow here in the league as we move into that.
You watched some spring ball this weekend. What stood out?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I thought the most. I mean, just I think just because of everything we've seen in Tennessee over the years now, and just the nature of where the program's at, I thought they were the one that. I mean, I probably had my eye on the closest just to kind of see, okay, is there anything we can really take away from this? I guess just in terms of you got a new coach in there, and Josh Heupel, you're trying to really, I guess you're ushering in a new era, but I think there's still just a lot with this program that you just don't know exactly where things are going to stand necessarily this season, next season, and just trying to figure out what they're going to do. I mean, the offense is. I think you knew what you were getting when they hired Josh Heupel. Like you're going to get a pretty up-tempo offensive style, and you saw that I think a little bit in what I watched for them this weekend. I mean, yes, that's going to be the thing that you sort of identify Tennessee football with. I think now here moving forward, like they're going to play an offensive style that's a lot of fun to watch when it's good. You got to have the players there, I think, to meet how they want to play, and you can just kind of look back at Heupel's history when he was at Central Florida, and you kind of what they're going to try to do. But I think it's again the matter of can you put the guys in place to succeed, and can you get the personnel that's really going to be able to be effective in doing that in the SEC. And I think that's where we really, start to look at it and say, okay, what are some things you can take away from a positive? I think from a positive standpoint, that's it. Like their offense is going to be something that's going to be very interesting with the right pieces in place. So I thought that was probably the biggest thing just to see with Tennessee. With them. And I think, again, a lot to be determined as we talked about last week or whatever it was a couple weeks ago with some of the others. But I think that to me, I mean, Ole Miss, they were South Carolina, Texas A&M, they were all on the field too and had their spring games. Storylines abound at different places. South Carolina, of course, another, place with a new coaching staff trying to sort of usher in a new era. I think Ole Miss, you kind of know what you're going to at least attempt to get with Lane Kiffin offensively. I think it's just a matter of the defense and seeing, okay, can they sort of rebound and get back to where they want to be or where they need to be, to compete in that division. And then A&M, you got to figure out a way to replace Kellen Mond, which will not be necessarily easy to do. So I think that's probably the biggest storyline for them there as we go into the summer and into the fall.
Yeah, if you were watching Tennessee A&M baseball on Saturday, you could hear the A&M spring game.
Yeah, right.
The real big gaffe by the network there. I think the broadcasters forgot to turn on the broadcast audio for the baseball guys, and instead we were hearing the background noise for the football game, which was very annoying if you were trying to watch a baseball game. So there was that. But I did not get to see the Aggies spring game because, again, I was watching baseball. But looked like they had some issues throwing the football in terms of the accuracy and everything. Of course, losing Kellen Mond, that leaves some big shoes. Now, A&M, they're probably enough talent there to figure it out, but probably not quite what you wanted to see in terms of the overall accuracy there.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I think, it'll be interesting because it's just a different dynamic. I mean, we know kind of with Kellen Mond, and sure, there was probably some frustrations at times with him too, as there is with any quarterback. But you're still talking about a guy that had a pretty unique, I think, skill set overall, just in terms of what he could do. Both with his arms and his legs. I mean, he's just someone that kind of was that type of guy that you could tell right away. I mean, he had a chance to be very successful, and I think he's going to have a chance, to play certainly at the next level. in the NFL. But yeah, how they replace that, that's gonna tell you a lot, I think, about A&M early on, and whether they can get that figured out in time for, not having to do the always dreaded dueling quarterback situation where you have to, maybe you don't have one quarterback, then you don't have one at all. If you got two, you don't have one. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that sort of competition plays out there as we move into the season.
Did they discover defense in Oxford?
Well, they're gonna have to because, like I said, I mean, you've got to be much better on that side because, again, when you play, I mean, and when you play in the SEC period, but when you play in that division specifically, where you know what you're going up against with Alabama and LSU and A&M. I mean, Mississippi State, like you're getting a unique offensive approach there from Mike Leach, and you just go up and down the line, and they've got to be better on defense. I think that has to be priority number one for them because that if not, I mean, again, you can only win so many games knowing that you're going to have to put up 40 something points a game, and it's just not going to be realistic at times against the SEC defenses either. So that has no doubt about it. That's their top priority.
Yeah, I mean, the issues with them have been defense and the running game. They get 4 turnovers and 10 sacks. I think if you're Ole Miss, you figure Lane Kiffin's going to find a way to score points and move the ball through the air. But I think that's got to be really encouraging because their defense was just horrid last year, and they haven't had much of a running game. I mean, that even dates back to Hugh Freeze, right? I mean, the last really good running back at Ole Miss that I can think of was they had the JUCO kid a couple years back, I think, but Dexter McCluster before that, and he was really more of a hybrid player. But I think that's two things that are interesting: is if the Rebels can find a little bit of a defense and can run the ball with some competency from that position. They've had some mobile quarterbacks. I'm not talking about running the ball, just running the ball, because they can do that with that mobility. But finding a guy that you can trust behind your QB has been an issue for them at times. So I think if you're Ole Miss, that had to be a little bit encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, I just think back to looking at their schedule last year, and you go up and down the line with Ole Miss's schedule, and like, are these bad basketball games or are these football games? Like, because
Alabama game.
I mean, yeah, 63-48, wasn't it? Like
something like that.
And then that was the Florida game. It was like 50, I think 51 something. It's just like, yeah, they had so many of those games. You just kept looking up and thinking, surely this is not going to be the way it's going to be the entire season. But it was like it never sort of got to the point to where it slowed down. I mean, they were winning games. I just pulled up their schedule now. Like, yeah, like the ones we mentioned. And then, you beat South Carolina. Great, 59-42. And then, you lose LSU 53-48. It's just, they had so many of those games last season. And, yeah, hopefully, with a more, normal setup too, I think going into next season, with the off season and such, we know how different it was last year. With everything going on. So maybe that's something that kind of helps them out a little bit too.
Do you ever think college football is going to swing back to where games in the 40s and 50s aren't as commonplace as they are now? I mean, a lot of it's rules. Rules have been more favorable for the offense. And now I think the other thing is these 7-on-7 tournaments. Like, 20, 30 years ago, everybody ran the ball in high school.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have that many skilled quarterbacks. And so now it's totally flipped, right? Everybody's throwing the ball. You might see a gimmick triple option type offense or wing T or something. But the way that players are brought up in high school and all these summer camps has completely changed the game, as have the rules. And I'm just wondering if it's ever going to go back to what it was before in terms of scoring environment.
I don't think so. I think the rule changes are just only going to continue to benefit offense, because I think that's what, I mean, look, let's face it too. And a lot of this, and I guess we'll hit on it before we wrap up with some of the rule changes, but, a lot of this is for television and, what makes the broadcast better and the presentation and all that. And I just think the rules are going to continue to sort of benefit some of the offensive type of, styles or however you want to look at it. I just think that's going to be the way we continue to move forward with this.
It's really weird to go back and watch games from 10 years ago, 15, where there were defensive struggles and third downs and the crowd really gets into it. And,
Well, it's where the NFL's headed too, right? I mean, you think
yeah,
about the NFL, like you look at the NFL scoring the past, I don't know, I'm sure there have been stats out there. I just can't remember them off the top of my head, but I know, like NFL scoring has been up when you look at some of the games, and really, I think that's just the way, because you're seeing more of these NFL teams move towards, these more, again, college style air raid spread offense. Like there's just where you have, these quarterbacks that come in like Lamar Jackson and guys like that who can just sort of, give you different elements offensively. And I think it really changes. That type of style is starting to go into the pro atmosphere, and that's where we go into it like this year. Guys like Justin Fields and quarterbacks like that you're going to see be in those positions. And I think it's just that the NFL game is moving more towards it too, where there's a lot more scoring and all that. So I think it's a product of where sort of the game's headed, and really just I think too, just the innovation on offense, to where the innovation on offense, the defense hasn't necessarily been able to keep up with some of the things, but like we said too, it also has to do with rule changes, and I think just having rules sometimes that are a little bit more free flowing for what you can do offensively, and again with the innovation and the styles and all that you're seeing at both levels, I think it only just allows more points in that regard.
Well, when Nick Saban goes from building his program around defenses that hold you to
Right.
225 yards a game to air it out and put 4 NFL receivers on the field at the same time and have a first round quarterback whose main attribute is throwing the ball, the game's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. That is it right there.
Let's see. We've got a few rules changes, speaking of which, that were announced over the weekend, I guess, or at least since we did a podcast. Teams now have to go for a 2-point conversion after scoring a touchdown in the second overtime. The 2-point conversion shootout will start with a third overtime, not the fifth. Taunting will be more strongly enforced, and teams can appeal for fake injuries after the game is over.
Boy.
Let's go with the 2 points first, then we'll get to the others. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think one of the points that someone brought up, and it was a really good article I thought was pretty thought provoking, was Tom Fornelli, who does stuff for CBS Sports and such, was talking about, if you think about it, the chances of it are very low, of course, but the 2-point conversion shootout starting the third overtime and not the fifth. What if don't you have to sort of maybe make some tweaks there if you get to like a national championship scenario or something, or a college football playoff game?
You would hope.
Do you really want, the game decided by 2-point conversion shootouts for all the marbles? You play an entire season going up and down the field and all that, and yet you're going to put the ball, on the 2-yard line. And I think that's something that you would hope there's some kind of clarification, and maybe some different circumstances, because I just don't think that's the right. And again, I mean, look through the years, how many overtime games have we had in national championship games and all that? Like, there haven't been a ton, but I think that's something you need to protect yourself against, because I think there would be quite a backlash from that if that's sort of the lasting image of your season. Again, the other stuff, I do think it's just for, like, it's broadcast. I mean, I think one of the things you saw too that people were pointing out, and I think it was mentioned, when they announced this, and people were kind of pointing out in their analysis, but when you have these longer games, TV partners aren't necessarily thrilled with that sometimes, because you've got a lot of programming. You have a certain window that you try to put these games into, and so if you get yourself to where it's a 6 overtime game, a 7 overtime game again, which are rare, those are something that I think you're just kind of protecting yourself against. And so I don't know that I have a strong feeling about that necessarily, just moving it up from saying, okay, you have to go for 2 in the second overtime versus, beyond that. That's fine. I mean, it is what it is. I think that's, again, I wouldn't mind if they just did that, period. Like, when you go to overtime, just do 2-point conversions. That's fine. Like, I wouldn't have an issue with that at all. So I don't know if that's a big problem necessarily, but I do think the one on the 2-point conversion shootout starting at the third, like, I think that's something you have to probably need to put some language in terms of if you're talking about it in a playoff scenario.
Maybe we should just do penalty kicks with field goal kickers.
Yeah, well, I'm not. Listen, those are entertaining. So just do that, and I think that's not a bad idea either.
Anything else before we end the show today? I guess we got minor transfer news in basketball.
Yeah, Andre Hyatt headed to Rutgers. He was at LSU, of course. Everything else, seems like, at least for now, I say this, and the transfer portal slowed down a little bit over the weekend. So we'll see if there's anything to that. But I think otherwise, not a whole lot else happening.
All right, Blake, we will be back on Tuesday with another podcast. I'll have power rankings for teams up probably this morning. We'll start to roll out the 14s with position players and pitchers. We got different lists for those. You can find those at southeastern14.com. You can follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern. Please rate, review, and subscribe to us, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Tell a friend. Obviously, we're putting out a lot of content here, and any help that you guys can give us as an audience is appreciated. But anyway, for Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee, host of the 14 Podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again on Tuesday.